A tiny home on wheels. A home that you built with your own two hands and designed to your liking. A home that is truly owned by you that you can take anywhere. My name is Paul Scheer and I've been building camper vans for 4 years now, and now that I'm comfortable building vans, I decided to record this whole process of restoring this 2008 Ford Econoline handicap shuttle into my dream tiny home. And what you're seeing me do now is kind of start to frame the van, and what I mean by framing is we're going to start putting wood studs and attach them to the metal of the van. So we're figuring out where we want to put these studs so we can attach our walls and all of our furniture to these studs that are secured to the actual frame of the van. So I just measured out and cut some 1x1 furring strips, and then we're going to use some screws, some Gorilla Glue, and some recessed drill bits to start tapping these into the van. And what these recessed drill bits do is they recess down into the stud itself so the screw head can be buried into the stud, and then we're just going to put some of that Gorilla Glue on the back side just to reinforce the security of the stud. Now this is the first time that we're actually starting to cut some wood and start actually tapping into the van itself, and I know it can be intimidating, but it's actually pretty simple. You just need to figure out where your floors and your walls are going to be attached, and you want to put a stud on all the ends, or as many ends as you can, and then you just attach them. Now, since we already spent all that time patching the holes in the floor, instead I'm just going to use glue for the floor studs rather than tapping more holes into the floor. There's a lot of wrong ways to do a van build, but there's also a lot of right ways, and I think this is one of them. Because there's no actual structural integrity issues with this, because all the weight of the furniture and all the stuff in your van is going to be pressing down on the floor anyway, rather than the walls that are actually hanging. I've seen people use 2x4s and frame it like they would a house, and to each their own. I'm sure it works out great. However, to reduce weight and also just to oversimplify things, I think this is a great solution. So now that we have all of our studs attached where we need them, now we're going to move on to our Killmat sound deadening pads. This was actually the first time I did this, and I have to say this is going to be the easiest step in building out your tiny home. You basically just have these big, sticky, almost tar-like pads with an adhesive that you peel off the backside to. And you might want to fact check me on the exact number, but if you cover 30% of your van's bare metal with these Killmat pads, you will significantly reduce the road noise when you're traveling down the road. I don't know too much about it, but it has something to do with just reducing the vibration in the exterior metal of your van. And I will say, having driven a van with these and without these, there is a pretty noticeable difference considering it only cost me about $110. When applying these pads, you just want to make sure that you're applying them to the metal that shares a wall with the outside rather than the cavity of the van. Now, I actually had a couple extra pieces and put them on my fiberglass roof, but if I'm being honest, I'm not sure that actually helped anything. So now that we have our studs and our Killmat pads in, I actually traveled all the way up to Oregon to work with AM Solar to film and record and document the whole process of putting together a professional electrical system for your tiny home. Although I already knew how to put together an electrical system, it was so beneficial for me to work with AM Solar and actually see how the professionals organize and link up all of these separate systems into one complete system to power your little home. Just like everything else in this world, you think you know how to do things, and they might not be the wrong way, but then you work with a professional and you realize how much you still have to learn. One of the first things we did here was figure out where we were going to put my 120 watt solar panel and then actually start the process of installing it. And since we didn't want to put any more holes in my roof, we actually used an adhesive to adhere these to the roof, which sounded crazy to me. And that hole that we just put there was inevitable. At some point we're going to have to run the wires from this housing that attaches to the solar panel down into our van. And just like everything else that goes on the outside that's protecting a hole, we're going to have to make sure that we create a nice seal so that way water can never get inside. As someone who has dealt with a lot of leaks and will still deal with leaks later on in this series, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make sure that everything is properly sealed. Water is extremely invasive and can be very destructive to everything inside of that van, not just the electrical, but all of your insulation and your walls. So now that we had the solar panel ready to go, what we did here is run some wires from our house battery down over to our car battery, so that way anytime the car is on, it's actually going to be charging our tiny home battery. In this system, we have 3 ways to charge. Right there, we just cut a hole for our shore power so we can plug in at RV parks or at a friend's driveway. And then we also have the solar panel that is going to do a slow charge, but it's a constant charge as long as the sun is out. And the charge that I use and rely on the most is the wires that we attach to the car battery. Your car's alternator is always charging your car battery. That's what keeps it from dying. So what we were able to do was tap into that charge so the alternator can charge both of the batteries whenever the car is on. And once we had all of our exterior wires sent into the van and wired, now we started working on putting together our electrical box where all of the wires and components are actually going to start coming together. One of the many things I learned while working with AM Solar was how to upholster something. By using just some fabric and spray glue and wood, we were able to make a very nice electrical box that was designed to our liking to fit where we wanted it and designed to store all of our components in the electrical kit. Like I mentioned earlier, no matter what I'm doing in life, I'm always reminded that there's always more to learn. And I thought it was funny that working with a professional solar company is where I learned how to upholster a box. So once we were happy with the box, we started to put together all these pieces and components to our liking so we could run the wires and start actually attaching everything. As someone who started with no prior experience or knowledge on how to do any of this, I want to take a brief moment to talk about my website. I designed a one-stop shop for building out your tiny home on wheels where I go over electrical diagrams, and AM Solar actually teaches you how to wire everything in your van. It's a perfect resource that has everything you need as a DIYer, and it's a resource that I wish I had when I started. So after spending 5 days up in Oregon with AM Solar, I then drove south to Reno to work with Josh from Havelock Wool. Havelock Wool is a top leading brand in insulating homes and tiny homes and campers, and I was fortunate enough to actually tour the facility and just learn everything I could about insulation. Insulation is a tricky one, especially as a DIYer, because if done improperly, you run the risk of mold, which can be very destructive to not only your structure itself, the home, but also your health. And why I'm such a strong advocate for Havelock Wool is because it's all natural. It's sheep's wool. You don't have to worry about any kind of vapor barriers because moisture can never get trapped, which if moisture can never get trapped, you'll never have to worry about mold. And although I didn't have to worry about mold, I did have to worry about rust. In next week's episode, I'll go over how I patched all of these rusty holes and restored them so they wouldn't rust again, as well as how I properly sealed and repainted the areas where the rust was contagious. We also cut some more holes in our van so we could wire some LED lights, as well as cut a big hole for our fan on top of the roof so we could have some airflow. Cutting holes in your van is intimidating, but it's really not that hard.